So the next step, after we identified who the operators were, we needed to determine the best way to get the project financed. And different operators have different ways of financing. Needless to say, this is these are large dollars, just like your road work is $115, $120 million. This is going to be about a $60 million project. Roughly $50 million to develop the land and build the buildings, equip the facility, and another $10 to $12 million that's required for cash in the bank for working capital to support the operational needs of the facility when it opens. So we started working with these two operators and came to the conclusion that the best way for this hospital to open is for it to be actually owned and ultimately, owned by the West Maui Improvement Foundation. The reason is that there are some very advantageous financing opportunities for the not-for-profit hospitals. And by making the West Maui Improvement Foundation the owner, you can take advantage of this very favorable financing climate. Also, the hospital, our projections show that this hospital will probably make money over time. In fact, I'm quite sure it will. And as a result, by the ownership being in the hands of the West Maui Improvement Foundation, the money that the hospital generates in terms of cash excess will ultimately be available to reinvest in the community through your own foundation. So there are two ways that you can get this hospital financed through a not-for-profit mechanism. The first is for the West Maui Foundation to issue a bond, and we have identified a purchaser of the West Maui hospital bonds for up to $50 million. And the bond buyer has they've reviewed all the details, they've looked at they've analyzed things, and they've committed $50 million subject to finding an additional $12 million, which is what will be needed for the working capital component. The other mechanism of financing is one that we have just recently started pursuing, and that is through the USDA. The USDA has two forms of loan programs well, several forms, but two in particular that are relevant to this project. The first is what's called a guaranteed loan. That's where a bank will make a loan to the West Maui Foundation to build this hospital, and the USDA, with the full faith and credit of the US government, will guarantee up to 90%, or they will guarantee 90% of that loan amount. And so it really reduces the risk level for a bank to make that loan. And the second mechanism is what's called a direct USDA loan, under which the government itself makes the loan, a federal loan, to the entity. And as with the road work that you heard about, the government, the federal government, is basically subsidizing the development of hospitals. And communities like yours that need a hospital will typically will get tremendous support from the USDA. As I said, we've had some preliminary conversations. The main reason that we're pursuing the USDA, in addition to what we already have, is that the USDA funds would be considerably less expensive. The USDA requires a 40-year repayment, whereas the bond requires a 25-year repayment. The bonds will be somewhere in the range of 7.5% or 8%. The USDA will probably be in the range of 4.5% or 5%. And so as a result, we think that it would be obviously advantageous to find the money through the USDA if we can get that approved. But the USDA, just like with the bonds, will require additional working capital of about $12 million. The key thing to remember, though, neither one of these mechanisms of financing requires a guarantee by the city of Lahaina, the county of Maui, the state of Hawaii, and it does not require taxpayer money to fund this. These loans, whether it's a bond or the USDA financing, will be made on the strength of the projections, the financial projections for this hospital. And there are some very standard ways that we in the hospital world look at hospital finances. We know how large this community is. We know how many hospital days your community will more than likely or actually does need. And we can predict the occupancy of the hospital. We can predict the number of emergency room visits. We know what the salary structure is on the island. We know how many people it takes to run a hospital. And we know what the supplies cost. And when we put all that together into a projection, it comes out showing that there is definite profitability for this hospital, sufficient to support either the bond or USDA loan. So it's not going to require taxpayer support in any way, shape, or form. It will be self-sustaining. So the next steps that we have are, number one, we've got to identify the source of the remaining $12 million that either the USDA or the bond purchaser will require. We need to make a final selection of the operator. And candidly, part of the selection process will hinge on which of these two operators are willing to put up most or a good portion of that $12 million. The third thing we have to do is then finalize the application for the USDA loan and continue to work with the purchaser of the tax-exempt type bonds and see which of them will end up with the most favorable rates and so forth. And then we've got to, at the same time, we have to secure zoning, entitlements for the property that's being used, finalize the building plans, finalize the loans or the bond issuance, and then after all those things are done, we can begin construction. The good news is that once we get to the point where we can construct, our method of doing this will result in a hospital being open about 9 months after the time we actually start construction. And we do this because we're able to work in parallel paths. One, while we're preparing the land and doing the site development, bringing in the utilities, we're actually fabricating big sections of the building that will ultimately become your hospital. And so there's still quite a bit of work to be done, but we've accomplished a lot by getting the biggest challenge was getting that $50 million. That's sort of the beginning of this process. The second was identifying the operators who are willing and able to both commit financially and with respect to operating experience and talent. And now we're really on the kind of the final stretch of getting this to happen. Well, we thank you very much for your allowing us to do this with you. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Tannenbaum and Deborah, thank you so much for coming here and giving us all this, what I think is really good news. And with that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming.
Mele ana ka wahine